Choosing Life by ginnyrules27, Chapter 30. Hades shook his head as he looked around the party that was currently happening. It had been Poseidon's idea to have a family get-together since their family had grown over the past months. Hades just thought it was a not-so-subtle way to meet the newest additions to the family, but he didn't want to say anything. If Mal wanted to bring the kids, she could, though with everything that happened during the birth, Hades would be surprised if she brought them. Hell, he was surprised she had elected to come, considering her royal duties and the likelihood that Demeter would be attending, even if Hades had yet to see his mother-in-law. "Hades!" Hercules called with a small smile on his face as he waved to the blue-haired god. Hercules had graciously offered to host the get-together, claiming it would make things easier for Macaria, as mortals couldn't be on Olympus, and she'd be handling 2 kids. Never mind the fact that Mal would also be handling 2 kids, but Hades wasn't going to argue about something that allowed Mal to bring her sunspots. "Hercules," Hades said, nodding his head in greeting. He elected not to use a nickname. He didn't want to poison the younger sunspots against Hercules. And yes, Hades knew that was rich coming from him, considering he used nicknames like Wonder Breath and Jercules in front of Mal and Hades all the time when they were growing up. However, that was more of the way of the Isle than anything else, and Hercules didn't deserve to have his grandchildren turned against him. He could wait until they were teenagers, and did so naturally with their teenage angst and whatnot. "Thank you for hosting us," he added, knowing Persephone would have been elbowing him in the side if she wasn't off with Rhea, Hades and Mal, as they introduced Mal's sunspots to Macari's children, Gwen and Marcos. "It's our pleasure," Hercules said, as he made his way over to his uncle, as to prevent himself from shouting across the room. "We were just happy you all could come, especially with Elle having her due date soon." Hades nodded. Poseidon's great-granddaughter was, in fact, not there. Neither was her husband, as he elected to hover by her like a nervous hen. What was it that caused these Auradon princelings and kings to turn into jello at the thought of being away from their pregnant spouses? Speaking of which, Hades thought as he noticed Ben was almost hovering around Mal and the twins. Catching the sunspot's eye, Hades motioned for him to come over, figuring Mal would appreciate him not calling her husband out in front of the whole family. "You wanted to see me, Lord Hades?" Ben asked as he walked over. "First off, kid, you don't have to call me Lord all the time," Hades said. "You married my daughter. I think we're on a no-title basis. And second of all, stop your hovering. There's being overprotective, and then there's being suffocating." Ben sighed but nodded, opting not to comment on Hades' use of the word kid when addressing him. He knew Hades did the same for Harry and Jay, and that he'd probably think of them all as kids for years to come. Ben was fine being called kid, just as long as he wasn't being treated like one. "I mean, he's a new father," Hercules said. "I remember when Meg had Hylas. I was probably just as nervous as King Ben is. Not to mention that unfortunate scene with Princess Stephanie was accosted by that photographer." "Yes, thank you for that memory," Hades sighed before looking back at Ben. "Listen, Ben, I can understand being worried that another attack is going to be coming out of the woodwork when it comes to your kids. I lived on the Isle. I lived in that fear for years. But that doesn't mean you let it rule your life because at some point, your kids are gonna grow up without your permission and not enjoy having their father around every corner." Ben nodded again before sighing. I want them to know that I'll be there for them, no matter what. And as sweet as that is, you have to remember one thing." "What's that?" "They're babies." Ben couldn't help but chuckle, and Hades smiled as he heard that. Good. The last thing he wanted to do was bring the sunspot down, because if he did that, then Mal would give him a lecture worthy of her mother. And no, of course he wasn't afraid of his eldest daughter. I
I know I don't have a reason to worry because they're godlings, but with Maurice having his blood pressure drop when Mal was in labour, and everything that happened with my own mother when she was pregnant with my sister,
Ben said with a sigh. It was Hades' turn to sigh, as he remembered what Belle had told him that day, when Mal and Ben had told them all that they were expecting a child. About how she had been pregnant a second time, but lost the pregnancy. Yes, Ben was only 3, but Hades wasn't surprised that he was trying to find ways to prevent another miscarriage, or anything else from befalling his family.
Kurt, I know your heart's in the right place, but you also have to remember that you're married to Mal,
Hades said.
She'd turn into a dragon and torch anyone who tries to hurt the sunspots before they got a chance to even look at them. As well, you've got the kids' Uncle Haddy, who's quite handy with a fireball. Their Aunt Uma, who'll drown whoever tries to hurt them. Well, if her husband didn't freak out over the thought. Honestly, Ben, Harry might be worse than you when it comes to being overprotective.
I'll take that as a compliment, Lord Hades, Harry said as he walked up. Sorry to interrupt, but Mel saw that you were talking to Bernie, and thus sent me to save her husband from whatever intimidation attempt was going on.
There was no intimidation attempt,
Hercules said, shaking his head.
Uh-huh, Harry told him. Come on, Benny. Gil wants to know if you need any more books for the twins' room. Apparently Marcos is an avid reader and wants to borrow new books all the time, so they're running out of room in their house. Is it bad that I consider it ironic? The grandson of Gaston being an avid reader?
Hades said. Only if it's ironic that Gil asked me the same thing, Lord Hades.
Harry said. Being at Oridon's been good for him. Had this been back on the Isle, I don't think he would have known what the word ironic meant. Be nice, Harry,
Hades said with a small chuckle.
Harry shrugged. I'm always nice. I haven't hooked anyone yet, have I? That's because you know full well you'd end up being smoked. Can you smite someone who's immortal? Do you want us to try?
Hades asked, raising an eyebrow.
Harry chuckled. In a rare moment of self-preservation, I'm going to say no. I want to see my kid be born after all. Oh, that's right. How's Uma doing? Hercules asked. She's doing well, Harry said after a moment. She's still trying to make it work with her trade route, but the further along she gets, the more she likes to stay home. The last thing we want is for her to end up giving birth on a ship. Which, for a pirate captain, would be alright. But I want to be there with my wife, like the captain was for my mum. Harry thought, no matter what happens, I want to be by Uma's side.
Ben gently rested a hand on Harry's shoulder, as if knowing what the pirate was thinking.
It'll be okay, he said. Trust me. We've married the 2 women who won't let anything stop them from achieving their goals. I dunno. Macaria clearly is such another woman. Harry said, You do remember what she was like against Freddy, right? While yes, I don't like to think about that night. Why? We won. I don't like to think about instances where my wife got injured, Harry.
Oh.
Right, I forgot about that part,
Harry said with a sheepish chuckle. Ben shook his head, more than a little amused.
That's all right. You have an excuse. Wasn't that also the night the denial died for you and Uma? Ooh, well played, Sunspot. Well played,
Hades thought, as he couldn't help but smile slightly at the shocked look on Harry's face.
I think you've been around Mal a bit too long, Benny. I was never in denial when it came to Uma, Harry said, shaking his head. That's not the way Mal tells the story, Ben said with a small snort. How do you think she'd react if I said you were denying ever being in denial? You wouldn't. Oh, wouldn't I? Harry shook his head. So this is what fatherhood does to people, huh? You forget, Harry, that not only am I currently married to Mal, but my older brother's Chip and my best friends are Akio and Amir, Ben said and then paused. Speaking of Akio, shouldn't he be here? I haven't had a sandwich forced into my hand all party.
It was Hercules' turn to shake his head. Ariel said Elle was going to be checking into the hospital today.
What, is she okay?
She is fine, Hercules said, holding up a hand to stem any concerned questions that looked to be coming from Ben's direction. Truthfully, he had to admit he was a little shocked that Ben didn't already know about this, but Hercules was going to chalk it up to the stress that only came from being a first-time parent. Never mind being the first-time parent to twins and also ruling over a kingdom.
You sure? Forgive me, but people usually don't go to the hospital because they're fine,
Ben said, working hard to keep his voice down, as to not startle Mal or Uma or Macaria. Hercules chuckled.
Elle's going to have a water bath, according to Ariel. They wanted to check her into the hospital a few days early, just to prepare. After all, with her chair, they want her to be comfortable, and with the amount of time it'll take from their castle to the hospital, no one wants her sitting in a wet chair while they make their way to the hospital while she's in labour. Oh, okay.
Ben nodded. That made sense now that he thought about it. He remembered rushing Mal to the hospital, and how much time it took getting ready before they were able to leave. Mainly because Mal had still tried to insist on a home birth before the first contraction took hold, and she ended up begging to go to the hospital. The last thing he wanted was for Elle to be sitting in a wet chair, waiting for everyone to get ready while she was in labour. Harry shook his head.
Normally I'd tease you about overreacting, Benny, but I'm just glad the lass is okay, and that there's nothing wrong with her guppy. Speaking of which, has there been any talk about the gender of the guppy? This coming from the guy who's refusing to learn the gender of his own kid?
Hades asked, raising an eyebrow.
I'm not refusing, Harry said. Uma and I are just doing it like we would have if this had been happening while we were on the Isle. Harry, you and I both know that if you had gotten Uma pregnant while you were both on the Isle, that the rats would have had a party that would have lasted throughout Uma's pregnancy, because it would have meant the end of your denial.
Harry shook his head and sighed. Why does everyone insist we were in denial?
Because you were,
Ben and Hades said at the same time. Hercules couldn't help but chuckle.
Hey, if it makes you feel any better, Harry, Meg was in denial about how she felt toward me. At least you didn't wait until a stone column fell on you because you pushed Uma out of the way of it to admit your feelings.
You know I can hear you, right, Wonderboy? Meg called from a spot next to Macaria.
Now I do,
Hercules said, having the good sense to at least look sheepish. Meg shook her head before turning her attention back to her grandchildren, and choosing to ignore whatever insanity the guys were planning over their little huddle. Well, all the guys, sans Gil, Haddie, Marcos, and Maurice, as Gil had taken Marcos to get changed, Mal was feeding Maurice while Haddie watched over Stephanie. Should we be worried about those four? Macaria asked, glancing over at where her father, great-uncle, and cousins by marriage were standing, the guys having gone back to their conversation.
Nah, Macaria shook her head. You'll learn quickly, Macaria, that the only time you truly worry is when there's complete silence.
I thought that was with kids.
Kids and husbands.
Mal snorted as she walked over to join the conversation, Maurice in her arms. I feel I should be asking what's going on, but I'm almost afraid of what I'll find out. Dad, Ben, Harry, and Great-Uncle Hades are having a secret huddle over there, and Mum was just saying that the time to start worrying is when you hear silence. Macaria explained as she began to bounce Marcos in her arms. Ah, and why is my father huddling with my husband and one of my best friends? Your guess is as good as mine, Mal. Meg shook her head, more than a little amused at the direction the conversation had turned.
You know you can always go up and ask, right?
When it comes to my father, sometimes it's better not to know, Mal said.
You have a point there, Meg told her. I mean, I worked with Tex over there, and I can tell you, sometimes it's better not knowing what goes on through his head. You know I can hear you, right, Nutmeg?
Hades called. I wouldn't have said anything if you couldn't hear me, Hades, Meg called back, shaking her head in slight exasperation. That's the whole point of calling you out within your earshot.
Touche, Nutmeg. Touche.
Mal shook her head as she gently bounced Maurice in her arms. Is your grandfather being weird?
Mal, you've known me your whole life. Have I ever been weird?
Do you want a serious answer, or an answer that doesn't embarrass you in front of the family? 'Cause I can do either one, but you need to give me some guidance as to what you're looking for, Dad. Hades shook his head, but smiled as his grandson seemed to coo in delight. Life off the Isle was all right by him, if it included his family. Yes, that even included Zeus. After all, they had buried the hatchet, and the young ones didn't need them making things awkward. And, yes, he was aware of how old it was for him to think that. But, all in all, this was a pretty good life. One he didn't think he'd get a chance to have. One he didn't think his children would get a chance to have, for that matter. And he would always be incredibly grateful that they did. Where's Rhea? Mal asked.
Where's Addy? Uma asked, as she looking around for the wayward goblin. Doesn't he also have Stephanie?
Hades sighed.
I think your brother might be teaching his niece and sister in the ways of mischief. And I'd like to point out that Herky is nowhere to be seen either. Well, this party just got interesting. Uma chuckled.
Aren't all our family get-togethers? Mal asked as she shook her head.
Touche, Mally.
Hades snorted as he proceeded to look for his son, daughter, and granddaughter. Oh, and his great-nephew, as it was safe to assume Herky was wherever Haddy was. And even though he was prepared for chaos, he still wouldn't trade this life for anything. Freedom with a chance for chaos was better than peace because of imprisonment, after all. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed this one. Before I get into what I like and don't like about this chapter, and there's plenty of the former and basically none of the latter, this is the first recording I've done since I've started adding music to my videos. You guys might be wondering why that is. As you all might have been aware, I was demonetized in March, and I finally was able to figure out, with help from the Google support team, that if I added non-copyrighted music to my videos, I'd be able to get monetized again, so I might finally be earning soon. Yay! I cannot tell you how much that'll mean to me, guys. Things have been a bit weird where I'm from, so a bit of extra money would be very useful. Anyway, I love that. Making it an Olympian get-together without it being too awkward. Because like in Greek mythology, it's very, very awkward because of the amount of incest there is. But what can you do? And yeah, I like that they've just all got the kids together. Hades and Hercules are buried the hatchet. Meg being the snarky queen that she is. And even Hades not being able to snap back because, like, she knows how to hit him with the sass so well. Love it. And anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment, and subscribe, and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye, my guys, gals, and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.